Breaking news as we come to you at 4. Law enforcement is starting to mobilize at an encampment at UT Dallas.
Yeah, students have established a camp there today. They're vowing to stay until the school meets their demands over the war in Israel and Palestine. I want to get to our Jason Allen. He's live for us in Richardson now.
And let's go back to Jason, because just until just a few moments ago, it had seemed the university was going to allow these demonstrators to take over part of campus. But as we can see now, that's changing. Jason, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you, Karen. Yeah, this has changed drastically in the last 30 seconds, and we're going to move here because we want to stay on the edge of what's happening. So just in the last minute or so, we saw, really in the last 10 minutes, we saw law enforcement start to move in here. We have not seen any of this presence throughout the day since this encampment was started early this morning before sunrise. But in the last 10 minutes, we saw, you can see it's sheriff from Dallas County. There are state troopers here. I saw Richardson police here, a number of law enforcement agencies. I want to go over here. You see there's an arrest happening right here. Just make sure you don't go too far there, Robert. In the last few minutes, they all just moved up suddenly. The organizers of the student protest just before this read a letter to people who were here at the camp saying they had received a letter from administration telling them that while they were allowed to peacefully protest, that they would not be allowed to have an encampment or any sort of structures, and that any attempt to stay in a camp or have those structures up could put them at risk of being arrested for trespassing and face other charges from the school. There's a fight happening right here as one of the demonstrators is fighting back against the law enforcement who have gone in to make an arrest. This is something that organizers said and told people they did not want to see. They said stay calm, don't have any vandalism, but they also made it clear that they were not going to go anywhere if something like this happened. They were going to hold this space down, they said, until their demands were met by the university. You can see this man right here, the camera's on him. He's struggling with law enforcement, yelling, fighting back. This is probably the third or fourth arrest that I've seen so far. Law enforcement came in quickly, as I said, very little warning other than that letter that was read from one of the student organizers to the group that had gathered here, and that was just about 10 minutes ago. They did tell people who they thought might be at risk, go ahead and get out of the camp, move back if you feel you're vulnerable or you don't want to be here. But a lot of people were chanting just moments ago that they did not intend to go anywhere at all. They were going to stay right here and be arrested if they needed to be. So now what you see is law enforcement very quickly picking up some of these tents, these overhangs. There's awnings. I'm right behind you, Robert. And we're trying to stay back here as well and stay on the perimeter so that we can see this and cover this, but not put ourselves in the way of anything. So I want you to see that sheriff and state troopers have now put together a couple of different lines. There's this line that we're on the side of. There's also an interior line that is slowly and methodically moving up. This is where the main encampment has been for most of the day, Ken and Karen. That's where it originally started. And then it had started to grow and move out as the day had gone on and more people had come in here to be part of this. We've watched it grow, but it's now being quickly torn down. This was particle board. This was pallets. There are tires that are chained to trees, so not all of this is going to be easily taken down. And they have, you're okay. Sorry, we're just stumbling over some people. There, as you can see, are a ton of supplies. It's water, it's food, and they've been bringing stuff here throughout the day. Ken and Karen, I'll stop for a second to let you interject or ask a question if you need to.
I just wanted to ask you a question, Jason, because, you know, I know you've been out there all day, and you said it has been growing. You can see the bottles of water. It's like they were in it for the long haul, and you mentioned that people had been coming. What I'm wondering is, because you've had a chance to talk to these folks, how many of these people are students? I know you spoke with at least one student, but, wow, we have
you say that.
Yeah, we have seen, though, in a number of cases at campuses across the country where a lot of these people who are being arrested aren't related to the school in any way. They're not actually students there. Can you tell us?
Yeah, and you were cutting out a little bit. I can tell you, yeah, based on what I've seen, the majority, and especially the organizers, have been students. That's what I could tell. Now, I will say that at the very beginning this morning, early on, organizers were saying, community members, come on out. Other groups, come on out. You don't have to be just a student to be part of this. So as the day has gone on, we have watched more people come who are clearly not students. Hey, Robert, can you turn around and catch Noor right there on the sidewalk? Sorry, I was just trying to get him to get a picture of one of the organizers who is a student, a sophomore, I think she said, who is just being arrested by police here and taken away. So to get back to your question, Karen, yeah, there are a lot of students, but it's been very clear throughout the day that more and more people have joined this who are not affiliated with the university.
Hey, Jason, Ken here. I know you've been covering these protests for some time now over at UT Austin as well. And from what we're seeing, these images that are coming back to us live right now, it does look like a situation that's kind of deteriorating quickly. I'm wondering, Jason, based on your experience covering these types of events or protests, at what point do you get this sense that, you know, pepper balls or maybe even tear gas might be introduced in some of the measures here to try and control the crowd? Are we to that point yet?
We're not there yet. I have not seen law enforcement even attempt to use anything like that to this point, Ken. Typically when you see that is when people who are here as part of the group that law enforcement is trying to move out. And that may be at one of these campus events or any one of the demonstrations or protests we've seen over the past few years. It's when the line won't move, right? It is when people won't submit to being arrested. When you see some of these people here now, most of them are being arrested without, they're not resisting at all. We have seen a few people throw some punches, fight back, and struggle. If there were a number of people who started to do that, and it's hard for me to see into the main camp right now, if there are a number of people that did that, that may be when you start to see some of those other tools used by law enforcement.
Sure.
And now, I just want to point out that line that's on the edge of the camp is kind of moving into the center now. So anybody who is on the edges has been moved out. Anyone in the center who's holding fast, that's where law enforcement's going, and they are quickly overturning tents, tearing them down, ripping down the Palestinian flags that are flying, and they're making a move to get rid of this as quickly as they can.
And Jason, reiterate for us, if you would, again, the different law enforcement agencies that are out there. You mentioned state troopers are out there, and who else?
Looks like sheriffs.
So I can see Dallas County sheriffs. Yeah, I see. Let's see. There's U.S. Marshals. I see Collin County Sheriff represented here. UT Dallas obviously is here. Police from the University of Texas system. It's hard for me to see, but there are a number of different agencies that have been brought in. And I want to go back to and remind you that throughout the day we have been asking the university, we've been asking university police what the plan was. Were they going to let this stand? And in fact, I spoke with a group of Jewish students this afternoon who said they were able to meet with a dean of students on campus because they were very uncomfortable with what was happening here. There were a number of students that had sent email to administrators today saying they didn't feel comfortable being on campus. They were worried that it was being allowed to escalate, I guess, or build up to this level. But they had been told by administrators that there weren't specifically any rules against setting up a tent or rules against sleeping on campus, and that the gathering to this point had been peaceful, so there wasn't any intent to move them out. Clearly, that changed, or there were discussions or negotiations happening that we were not aware of and that those students were not informed of or privy to, because this law enforcement presence clearly they were preparing for this for most of the day, and then when they made the move to come in, it has happened very, very fast.
And you mentioned, Jason, that it was announced to the students, to the crowd, that the law enforcement would be coming in to give them time to disperse if they chose?
Well, one of the student organizers, Karen, announced it to the kids who were gathered, or the group. I shouldn't say kids, the group that was gathered. There wasn't any direct communication that we saw to the group from any school officials or staff. One of the organizers had a letter in their hand. I saw it. It was on school letterhead, and they basically read verbatim the few paragraphs that said, if you don't leave, you could be subject to trespassing charges and other school discipline. Then they had, I'm going to say, 10 minutes, maybe less, before we started to see law enforcement move in. So that gave them, they had time to make a very, very quick decision. If they didn't want to be arrested, they could move to the outside of the camp that had been set up. And we saw a few people do that, just sort of move away to the edges. But most of the people who had been here most of the day, they definitely stayed where they were. So those are probably the arrests that we have been seeing happen here over the last 10 minutes. Sorry, I'm just finding Robert again so we can move to this other side. And you can see that a lot of these demonstrators have now moved to the outer edges where they continue their chants and their demonstrations. Now, one of the things that was in that letter, Karen and Ken, that was read by the student organizer was students were welcome to protest, welcome to have a peaceful protest, but they would not be allowed to have an encampment or to claim a section of the campus like they did starting very, very early this morning.
Right. Jason, we're getting a live shot right now from the chopper, so we're getting a chance to see this overhead, probably a slightly different perspective from what you have there on the ground. But I can tell you as the camera is pulling out, zooming out a bit, you can see a line of those officers standing face to face with some of the demonstrators there behind what looks to be some like a waist-high wall.
Right, they erected that earlier. It's like plywood.
Right,
and things
right.
like
I think Jason was talking about that. But you could also see, look at what was the encampment.
Right.
All those tents are flipped up now, and everything is just kind of thrown across the ground there. Jason, we're seeing the group of demonstrators there. Do you get the sense that they're thinning out, or they just simply moved, those that didn't get arrested? Did they just kind of shift over?
Yeah, they really did. Most of them just shifted over, right? They shifted outside the boundaries of the encampment. And I think that that's where the line has been drawn here, right? And we have seen this at UT Austin a couple of times now, Ken, where students have been allowed to protest. I've been down there when the protests were peaceful. But once people made an attempt to try to build structures, camp out, claim a space as theirs and not something for the public, that's when we saw law enforcement move in. That was a big question through most of the day here, is because we saw the camp and law enforcement wasn't moving, and so we were asking what the intent was, and well, we definitely got our answer here this afternoon. Just to talk about what you were saying about the structures and the barricades that are built, yes, it is mostly very thin plywood, press board, although as I'm looking on the other side of it now, a lot of it has been built up and propped up with 2x4s to be fairly sturdy, and it had been getting bigger throughout the day, and there were people that were prohibited from coming in. Like we never were able to go inside. Any student that came to the entrance and asked to go in were told that they could, as long as they abided by a long series of rules, behavioral rules that the organizers had set up. So that's why we saw it continue to build up throughout the day and get bigger until now, when law enforcement has destroyed it pretty quick.
Yeah, we could hear them just now chanting "shame on you" to the officers, but it's not the protest, right, that they've got a problem with. It's the encampment that's not allowed. They can protest all day, all night if they want. That's not the issue, correct?
100%, Karen. You've got it. And, you know, I told you earlier that I talked with some Jewish students who were here on campus, and when I asked them about how they felt about the encampment being allowed to be built up, escalating from a sit-in last week to a protest to an actual encampment. One of the points they made was, we have no issue at all with people having their say on what's happening. We may disagree with what they're saying, but they should be allowed to say it. They said once it starts to cross that line of time, place, and manner, and infringe on the space of others, that's where we have questions and where we're feeling uncomfortable. And at the time this morning, those students said, we feel this is very, very close to crossing that line. Clearly, UT Dallas and their police department and other law enforcement agencies felt it was not only close, but that it absolutely crossed that line. We can see that now with them taking this down.
And Jason, when you see the presence of the state troopers there, obviously, we're thinking back to what took place at UT Austin just a couple couple of days ago. I mean, a very, very similar scene, obviously, when you see the brown uniforms there. Then you start thinking about some of the comments that the governor has made about some of these encampments in public universities throughout the state. And so I don't know, Jason, but you start to wonder, what kind of precedents this is now setting for other state universities that are having similar situations and what could potentially happen on those campuses. You mentioned, Jason, that they got a little bit of warning and then they moved in. I'm wondering now if this is sort of the playbook now that might play out at other campuses. We know UNT is also planning a similar type of demonstration.
Right, Ken, and what we saw originally last week down in Austin, right, with the first attempts at an encampment and then law enforcement moving in very quickly. That developed over a period of hours, and there was a lot of criticism for how quickly it happened. The next takedown down at UT Austin happened, I'd say, a little bit more under control, right? And it seemed like there was a little bit more of a plan. And this one, very clearly, there was a plan here. Give these students who are here warning. And that warning was about 10 to 15 minutes. That gives you enough time to make a decision. Are you going to stay here and risk arrest, or are you going to get out? And that's it. You get that short 10 or 15 minute warning, and you make your choice. So those who made that choice to stay where they were, they've already been taken away. I have not seen, as in the last couple minutes as we've been standing here, any additional arrests. I don't know if you were able to see that from up above. I'm on the east side of the encampment right now. This is kind of the back side of the encampment. It's where we have been for most of the day. The front side over on the west, that's the direction that all of the law enforcement agencies came in from. So they definitely came in through the opening in the walls that organizers had set up here. But again, I'm not seeing any additional arrests happening because everybody who was in the interior of the camp, it appears, has been moved out. There was no discussion or encouragement to get out. It was just if they were there, law enforcement very quickly put them under arrest. Everybody else who has moved to the outside edges, they are being allowed to stand their ground, have their say. You can hear the chants going back and forth. There's somebody hitting a drum, there's somebody with a PA system, and law enforcement is not making any moves, at least right now, for them to stop doing that. And we have not, at least I have not, heard any orders or commands from law enforcement to disperse. That's another thing we may see at some point, and that we did at UT Austin in the two protests there, is that there was a very loud command for people to disperse, to break up the crowd. Now, the crowd broke up, and it came back later, but it was smaller and more under control. So that's something I think in the next few minutes, Ken, we'll be watching for, is to see if there are any sort of those commands from law enforcement for this crowd that's gathered to sort of break up.
I can't get over, this is such a marked contrast to what we saw last week there at UT Dallas. They were inside, they were they were protesting, they were clearly protesting, clearly demonstrating, but this is much more vocal and I would say outraged than what we saw last week.
Well, and the numbers also, the numbers of those involved in the protests have also grown. But, it would be interesting, obviously right now, it's hard to get a count with everything that's going on. But as we were asking Jason, how many of these are actually students versus other folks who may just be joining in with them, who have nothing to do with the university? I'm curious. That would be interesting, I think.
Sure. No, and that's fair to cover that again. And I think that throughout the morning, what we saw was majority students. And I think that what you see this afternoon, at least on these outer edges, is most likely students, because a lot of students have been coming to and from class throughout the day. They might join for a little bit, then go to class. I heard somebody who came by to see what was going on, and his friend said, well, you're just supposed to leave class and stay here. And he said, well, I can't do that. I have finals. I have a presentation. But, he intended to come back. At the same time, they have been inviting the community. So there have been other local community leaders who have stopped by throughout the day and made speeches, led prayers. So it's not just students. And if you watch some of the communication that happens on social media throughout the day, there were a lot of people who said, wait till this afternoon. I'll be there when I get off of work. We'll join you. We'll add to the numbers. So I think there's that question there of also that, we can ask at a later time is, did law enforcement maybe time this out or plan this before numbers got bigger in the afternoon hours or before the encampment really got settled in to stay the night. Because Ken and Karen, we talked to them about that today. The organizers, they fully intended to stay the night here. We asked, do you plan to escalate it further from there? Will you do what we saw at Columbia or UCLA, moving into buildings? And they said, well, those communities made those decisions based on what they felt they needed to do to get their voice out. Right now, we just intend on holding down this space. If it goes beyond that, that would be a community decision. So they didn't rule it out, but they didn't have plans to take it beyond this space. But it's clear that the school is not going to allow them to hold this space either.
You know, Jason, you mentioned finals, and I was wondering about that because, you know, it is finals for a lot of kids. And I know at some campuses across the country, administrations are getting to where they've had enough and they're saying, okay, we're going to suspend those of you who are escalating this or maybe taking this in a different direction. And some kids aren't going to get a chance. I did the same thing you did, Jason. Some of these students aren't going to get a chance to graduate as a result of this. Have you heard anything from UTD's administration as to what they might plan to do?
No, there has not been any communication directly to us from the school administration or from the police department here today. You know, to your point, though, that has been one of the main concerns of these schools is interrupting what happens with the end of the school year. This is the last week of classes here. Finals are next week. I was talking to you earlier about a copy of an email that I had been shown from a Jewish student on campus who's about to graduate and told campus administration this morning, I don't feel comfortable coming onto campus right now in the last week. So those are those time and place and manner decisions that university administrators are considering right now and figure out how to handle these protests as they pop up. It's a difficult balance of the free speech that they want to allow students to have, but also protecting the education and the classes that are going on for the students who are not involved in these demonstrations.
You know, at some point, Jason, we'll a little later on in this newscast, you know, we'll get to talking about the weather, but it's worth bringing up that, you know, they're clearing out the encampment also at a time when, you know, we're gearing up for some severe weather overnight. Not sure how much of that the folks down there on the ground there were aware of that, Jason, but, you know, who knows? Maybe this was what needed to happen also to prevent any other kind of sort of severity taking place.
For their own safety. For
their own safety, because, you know, what we're talking about, again, is some severe storms later on tonight.
Right.
Yeah, I was actually considering that this afternoon. I was trying to go back and look through some of the other encampments, and I don't think any of them have faced any serious threats from weather. With all these tents that are set up, you know, it only takes a quick gust of Texas wind to pull some of those awnings up in the air and send them flying. I think there's a chance it would have been a very, very difficult night to be camping out on campus, depending on what these storms do. But that's not going to be an issue now. I think what will be interesting to see in the next hour or so as we're out here, Ken, as you talk about safety, is how quickly maybe they try to move protesters back or move them out of here. Again, I want to point out that now that law enforcement has sort of taken control of this camp, which is in the central mall area of the UTD campus here, now that they've taken control of that space and gotten that back, they're not making any efforts to push anybody else out. They're not moving toward any of the demonstrators at all. They are simply holding their ground and making sure that nobody moves back into that spot.
Yeah. Jason, can you give us an approximation of some of the numbers this morning, say, when you were there earlier, compared to maybe what is there now or was before the officers moved in?
Started out, I'd say this morning, Karen, with a few dozen, right? There were maybe 2 or 3 awnings, 4 or 5 tents, maybe 3 dozen. I would say by this afternoon it had grown to 120, 150. Now, keep in mind that the numbers were changing. Some people would come and go. Some people would leave and go to class and come back. People from the community would come in, make a speech, say a prayer, then leave for a bit. So it was kind of up and down. But, you know, from those initial few dozen this morning to, I'd say, 125, 130, somewhere in there this afternoon.
We are looking at live pictures right now, folks, if you're just joining us here at 425. It was just a couple of minutes before the start of this newscast that our reporter there on the ground, Jason Allen, reported a heavy police presence moving in to remove protesters who had set up an encampment on the UTD campus there in Richardson. About 25 minutes later, this is what we're looking at right now. It looks like all those folks have been pushed back, as Jason was saying.
And we've seen a number of arrests.
And several of them. I haven't seen any lately, but at the very beginning of it, it looked like it was arrest after arrest after arrest. I think Jason was talking about that. And Jason, it looks like from the chopper shot that all those tents and tables, they just kind of all threw it into a pile in the middle of that area that you were talking about.
And they get off now to keep people back.
From going back in there.
Right.
Right. There was definitely an attempt, Ken and Karen, to just destroy the encampment. Right. There's no effort to move it out. They just really wanted to take it down. And since they did that, and it all came down quickly, so it was just grab the tents, rip them apart, flip them over, tear them down, pull the flags down, and then so we can see there's Richardson police who are right here. There's Collin County Sheriff and DPS who are all standing right here together. They've just formed the line and stay there. Now, as you hear one of the demonstrators behind me shouting about how this was a peaceful protest, I'll make the point that yes, it was peaceful throughout the day. We're live right now, so we're talking about it. I've been here for all day. So it was a peaceful protest throughout the day. There were chants, there were prayers, and in fact the organizers did tell people to be careful of their behavior. They said, don't vandalize anything, don't do anything that could be used against us, and they would repeat that very regularly for the new people that showed up. However, as they read that letter from the school, you heard that really the defining decision for law enforcement to come in was the encampment, and the school and law enforcement, Ken and Karen, were not going to let that stand.